Ethnic conflict, a form of conflict in which the objectives of at least one party are defined in ethnic terms and the conflict, its antecedents, and possible solutions are perceived along ethnic lines. The conflict is usually not about ethnic differences themselves, but over political, economic, social, cultural, or territorial matters. Ethnic conflict is one of the major threats to international peace and security. Conflicts in the Balkans, Rwanda, Chechnya, Iraq, Indonesia, Sri Lanka, India, and Darfur, as well as in Israel, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip, are among the best known and deadliest examples from the late 20th and early 21st centuries. The destabilization of provinces, states, and in some cases, even whole regions is a common consequence of ethnic violence. Good day. My presentation today would talk about ethnic conflict or strife in Africa and how this ethnic conflict before relates to the present issues also of ethnic conflicts and strifes still in the African continent. My presentation covers ethnic conflicts in Rwanda in the year 1994, and the violence in Ethiopia underscores unresolved ethnic tensions in 2018. When analyzing conflict in African, many experts consider ethnicity as a major cause of conflict, but few consider it as a potential tool for lasting peace. Past and ongoing crises in Africa, like the Rwandan genocide, the crisis in Darfur, the civil wars in Nigeria, the quarrels between the whites and the blacks in Zimbabwe, or Tutsi and other Rwandophones in Democratic Republic of the Congo or DRC, show evidence of the role that ethnicity plays as a trigger of conflict in some parts of Africa. And lastly of my presentation is that how this African ethnicity predicament face COVID-19. This year marks the 26th anniversary of the Rwandan genocide, also known as the genocide against the Tutsi. This tragedy is the first thing that comes to mind for many when Rwanda is mentioned. More than 800,000 people lost their lives during the 100-day killing spree, and the horror is still fresh in the world's collective memory. While the tragedy should never be forgotten, there's a lot more to Rwanda than that terrible moment in history. The country and her citizens have made impressive and almost miraculous strides in the last quarter of a century. Rwanda is a beautiful and fascinating place that is worth getting to know. This is the land of 1,000 hills. Despite of these wonderful things about Rwanda, the country was scarred with a horror that forever will be a darkest part of the Rwandan people. In just 100 days in 1994, about 800,000 people were slaughtered in Rwanda by ethnic Hutu extremists. They were targeting members of the minority Tutsi community, as well as their political opponents, irrespective of their ethnic origin. How did the genocide start? About 85% of Rwandans are Hutus, but the Tutsi minority has long dominated the country. In 1959, the Hutus overthrew the Tutsi monarchy, and tens of thousands of Tutsis fled to neighboring countries, including Uganda. A group of Tutsi exiles formed a rebel group, the Rwandan Patriotic Front, or RPF, which invaded Rwanda in 1990, and fighting continued until a 1993 peace deal was agreed. On night of April 6, 1994, a plane carrying the President Juvenal Habyarimana and his counterpart Cyprien Nataryamira of Burundi, both Hutus, was shot down, killing everyone on board. Hutu extremists blamed the RPF and immediately started a well-organized campaign of slaughter. The RPF said the plane had been shot down by Hutus to provide an excuse for the genocide. And this is Rwanda's mystery that won't go away. How was the genocide carried out? With meticulous organization, lists of government opponents were handed out to militias who went and killed them along with all other families. Neighbors killed neighbors, and some husbands even killed their Tutsi wives, saying they would be killed if they refuse. At the time, ID cards had people's ethnic group on them, so militias set up roadblocks where Tutsis were slaughtered, often with machetes, which most Rwandans kept around the house. Thousands of Tutsi women were taken away and kept as sex slaves. Why was it so vicious? Rwanda has always been a tightly controlled society, organized like a pyramid from each district up to the top of government. The governing party, MRND, had a youth wing called the Interahamwe, which was turned into a militia to carry out the slaughter. Weapons and hits lists were handed out to local groups who knew exactly where to find their targets. The Hutu extremists set up a radio station, RTLM, and newspapers which circulated hate propaganda, urging people to weed out of the cockroaches, meaning kill the Tutsis. The names of prominent people to be killed were read out on radio. Even priests and nuns have been convicted of killing people, including some who sought shelter in churches. By the end of the 100-day killing spree, around 800,000 Tutsis and moderate Hutus had been killed. Did anyone try to stop it? The UN and Belgium had forces in Rwanda, but the UN mission was not given a mandate to stop the killing. A year after US troops were killed in Somalia, the US was determined not to get involved in another African conflict. The Belgians and the most UN peacekeepers pulled out after 10 Belgian soldiers were killed. The French, who were allies of the Hutu government, sent a special force to evacuate their citizens and later set up a supposedly safe zone, but were accused of not doing enough to stop the slaughter in that area. Paul Kagame, Rwanda's current president, has accused France of backing those who carried out the massacres, a charge denied by Paris. How did it end? The well-organized RPF, backed by Uganda's army, gradually seized more territory until July 4 of 1994. When its forces marched into the capital, Kigali, some 2 million Hutus, both civilians and some of those involved in the genocide, then fled across the border into the Democratic Republic of Congo, at the time called Zaire, fearing revenge attacks. Others went to neighboring Tanzania and Burundi. Human rights groups say RPF fighters will kill thousands of Hutu civilians as they took power, and more after they went into DR Congo to pursue the Interahamwe. The RPF denies this. In DR Congo, thousands died from cholera, while aid groups were accused of letting much of their assistance fall into the hands of the Hutu militias. Has anyone faced justice? The International Criminal Court was set up in 2002, long after the Rwandan genocide, so could not put on trial those responsible. Instead, the UN Security Council established the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda in the Tanzanian town of Arusha to prosecute the ringleaders. A total of 93 people were indicted, and after lengthy and expensive trials, dozens of senior officials in the former regime were convicted of genocide, and all of them Hutus. Within Rwanda, community courts, known as Gakaka, were created to speed up the prosecution of hundreds of thousands of genocide suspects awaiting trial. Correspondents say up to 10,000 people died in prison before they could be brought to justice. For a decade, until 2012, 12,000 Gakaka courts met once a week in villages across the country, often outdoors in a marketplace or under a tree, trying more than 1.2 million cases. Their aim was to achieve truth, justice, and reconciliation among Rwandans, as Gakaka means to sit down and discuss an issue. What is Rwanda like now? President Kagame has been hailed for transforming the tiny, devastated country he took over through policies which encourage rapid economic growth. He has also tried to turn Rwanda into a technological hub and is very active on Twitter. But his critics say he does not tolerate dissent and several opponents have met unexplained deaths, both in the country and abroad. The genocide is obviously still a hugely sensitive issue in Rwanda, and it is illegal to talk about ethnicity. The government says this is to prevent hate speech and more bloodshed, but some say it prevents true reconciliation. Charges of stirring up ethnic hatred have been leveled against some of Mr. Kagame's critics, which they say is a way of sidelining them. He won a third term in office in the most recent election in 2017 with 98.63% of the vote. After the Rwandan incident, the genocide, did the conflict or ethnic strife stopped or halted in African continent? So let us see with the second event, which is also considered an ethnic conflict in Africa. This is the violence in Ethiopia underscores unresolved ethnic tensions. For 3 years between 2015 and early 2018, there were popular protests across Ethiopia, but particularly in the country's two largest regions, Oromia and Amhara. Oromia, one of the regions in Ethiopia's ethnically constituted federation and the country's most populated one, also happens to be the political constituency of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. Unfortunately, the region is the country's biggest security challenge. Ahmed's efforts to address simmering ethnic conflict across Ethiopia have been mostly successful. His government has managed to improve relations between the Oromo and Somali groups, which had previously clashed, and ethnic Gideos, who had been displaced from Oromia, have by and large returned to the region. The latest spurt of ethnic clashes was triggered by the murder in late June of Hachalu Hundisa in Addis Ababa. He was a 34-year-old Ethiopian singer and activist for the rights of the Oromo. Ethnic violence ensued around the capital and the regional state of Oromia. At least 239 citizens and security personnel have been killed. The internet was also shut down across Ethiopia, and common tactic the government uses to prevent the spread of violence nationwide. It has now been partially restored. The violence points to the need for Abiy to address the tensions around Oromia. Failure to do so will mean that ethnic tensions and violence in Ethiopia will continue. Why Oromia is a hotbed of ethnic tensions? Formation of Oromo-based ethno-nationalist movements that fought for freedom and equally began the era of Haile Selassie, who ruled as emperor from 1930 to 1974. Oromo Liberation Front, the most famous of them, was established in 1973. The political narratives exploited by ethno-nationalist Oromo groups were designed to pit one group against another. In particular, most ethno-nationalists wrongly accuse the Amhara people and the country's imperial past for what they refer to as their history of marginalization. Class-based oppression was undeniable. Additionally, most of the country's peasants, regardless of their ethnicity, received the brunt of the exploitation, but there is no consensus on the marginalizing of any particular group. Nonetheless, the marginalization narrative succeeded in creating ethnic hatred towards non-Oromos in Oromia. In fact, the Amhara people are not only Ethiopia's poorest, but widely recognized as the poorest in the world. This despite being blamed for marginalizing the rest. So, how did they manage ethnic tensions? Managing the ethnic tensions in Ethiopia. Since he came to power in April 2018, Abiy has attempted to bring ethno-nationalists to the political center. There have been positive responses. For example, members of armed groups returned home at his invitation. But of those who returned, the Oromo Liberation Army refused to disarm. It has been in conflict with Ethiopian army in Guji and Woliga within the Oromia region for more than a year. This has led to the killing of local administrative officials, mayors of towns, and government security officers. Innocent citizens have also been kidnapped. In a country that has been ravaged by the politics of ethno-nationalism, most occurrences are interpreted along ethnic lines. Consequently, the government blames the ethno-nationalist political opposition for inciting ethnic violence. Following Hondisa's death, the government arrested powerful activists Oromo Jawar, Mohammed, and other political leaders. It accused them of using the tragic death of Hondisa to incite ethnic violence. The government raided the Oromia media network, which was founded by Jawar Mohammed, who was until recently its director, and detained some journalists. The network was calling for more violence. Even Facebook took down some of the network's posts for inciting violence. So, this ethnic conflict in Africa, these cultural differences and important issues shaping international politics, these cultural affiliations and ethnic identity are particularly strong factors shaping group relations. These conflicts have led to tremendous human suffering and are a significant threat to international security. Instability, refugee flows, spillover effects, and other international consequences guarantee that ethnic conflict remains an issue on the international political agenda. However, it is not the cultural differences per se that led to the conflict, but the political, ideological, and economic goals of international actors, regardless of whether these actors are states or ethnic groups. Given the complexity of ethnic and cultural conflicts, there is no easy solution to relate the related issues. Like, for example, so with the question, why Sub-Saharan Africa needs a unique response to COVID-19? Is it because of their African ethnicity predicament, or is it because of their African socio-cultural aspect? The continent's population and health systems make it different from other regions that have experienced COVID-19 to date. Three factors are important at the population level. First, the continent's demographic structure is different from other regions in the world. The median age of the 1.3 billion population in Africa is 19.7 years. By contrast, the median age in China is 38.4 years, and the median age in the European Union is 43.1 years. Although Africa's youth may be considered a significant protective factor in the pandemic, how the virus will evolve and manifest itself on the continent remains unknown. The second factor within the population is the high prevalence of malnutrition, anemia, malaria, HIV/AIDS, and tuberculosis. Liberia, for example, has one of the highest rates of stunting in the world. 1 in 3 children under 5 years old are stunted. In recent weeks, we have witnessed an increase in the incidence of malnutrition. Moreover, the rainy season has come early this year, which means that malaria cases will rise rapidly, and peak malaria cases in 2020 may coincide with the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. We should therefore anticipate that in Africa, a higher incidence of severe forms of COVID-19 will occur in younger patients because of the demographics and associated endemic conditions that affect the immune system. Malnutrition, anemia, malaria, HIV/AIDS, and tuberculosis are likely to increase the severity of COVID-19. Africa may not see the same narrative of most people who will get it will be fine play out. Third, social cohesion and social gatherings are of great importance in Africa. For example, weekly attendance of a religious service is highest in Africa, with rates as high as 82% in Uganda and Ethiopia. As a result, measures to impose social and physical distancing may prove to be more challenging, as demonstrated by the protests that broke out on March 20, 2020 in Senegal, after public gatherings, including gatherings at mosques, were banned as cases of COVID-19 rose. Earlier this week, Tanzania came under scrutiny when was announced that the country will not close places of worship. The African context is unique. There are population structure differences, high prevalence of endemic diseases, and the double burden of disease, with health systems that are stretched thin with minimal critical care capacity. A robust COVID-19 response for the continent will need to take these factors into account and include community engagement, health leadership, and involvement of youth and religious leaders to drive containment and the health system level, temporary repurposing and reorganizing of the surgical system will be key to increasing critical care capacity during the response, focusing on what we have as we move forward. History has stripped Africa's people of the dignity of building their nations on their own indigenous values, institutions, and heritage. The modern African state is a product of Europe, not Africa. To attempt at this late date to return to ancestral identities and resources as basis for building the modern African nation would risk the collapse of many countries. At the same time, to disregard ethnic realities would be to build on loose sand, also a high risk exercise. Is it possible to consolidate the framework of the modern African state while giving recognition and maximum utility to the component elements of ethnicities, cultures, and aspiration for self-determination? And this ends my presentation of the socio-cultural aspect of Africa. Thank you, and may God bless us all.